Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're here today with Matt Simmons, who's the head of cloud platforms at Fanatics Betting and Gaming. Oh my God, pronouncing words is hard, especially with an accent. I'm super excited to talk to Matt today, and we were just talking about how many topics we have that we wanted to discuss on this podcast. But today we're going to talk about hiring in the current market and the experiment that Matt has conducted in the recent months. So, Matt, why don't you introduce yourself better than I did?
Sure. So I'm Matt Simmons, and I run our cloud platforms teams at Fanatics Betting and Gaming. So I guess for scope, for those who are sort of like interested in that space or are kind of questioning what that means, it's like basically our runtime environments. So our distributed runtime environments, we're in public cloud and AWS. It's our release pipelines and automation. It's observability, databases, messaging, and caching. So that kind of whole enablement space for engineering organizations.
So, tell us about tell me about the experiment that you conducted. So you just mentioned that, you didn't approach hiring through the traditional manner. So tell me a little bit about that.
I mean, relatively traditionally, but yeah. So, and I'd say the experiment is still ongoing. So, this is something that I'm still giving a lot of thought to, still learning a lot from. But and maybe it's a bit much to call it an experiment. But here's what I did. Um, I'm hiring. I'm hiring for a lot of positions. Still, actually have 4 roles available, mostly in the data platform space. But I had 5 positions open originally. Wanted to fill them very, very quickly. And I did what almost everybody does when they're a hiring manager, which is I jumped on LinkedIn and wrote a post, right? I said, hey, I'm hiring. But I didn't want it to just, I don't know. I know that the way that the market is right now, it's really saturated with candidates. And if you're a candidate right now, I feel for you. It's probably really terrifying. So let's do this. I'll read you the post, and then I'm curious what your reaction is to it. And then I can kind of like tell you, we can go through the fallout of that post and how I've sort of like dealt with that. So what I posted here is I just said, hey, I'm hiring. Here's what I'm looking for. And then I listed the roles. And then after that, I wrote, so normally I'd post this with a blurb about how awesome the team you'll be joining is, and it is. But if you're in this war zone of a job market right now, I expect your grasp on sanity may be somewhat fragile at the moment, and you're not here for my chest thumping rah-rah bullshit. So if you're in my network, somehow finding the courage every day to hit one more apply button and fill out the same idiotic forms yet again, just hit me up. Or maybe that's not you and you're just curious about the possibilities, but understandably anxious about what entering the market again would be like. Either way, just send me a message if you're interested. No paperwork, no forms. We can talk like people and we can feel out together whether any of these roles, this team, and this company could be a good fit for you. My schedule is bananas because I'm not a recruiter and I have a day job leading an engineering domain. But until these roles are filled, I will prioritize you and attempt to give you back a little of what this process seems to have lost: humanity.
So this is very interesting because it's like bringing humanity back into the process, and that's like counterintuitive, especially in the market where it's like it's the employer's market, right? Like nobody, like people are getting thousands of applications for every role, and that's obviously very tough on candidates. So what has the response been like?
The response was big. So I have that's actually been one of the sort of fascinating learnings from this is that I probably occupy a sweet spot in terms of the number of followers and number of connections that I have. Where if I were too well known and too connected, the scale of this probably would have been too much to handle. As it is, I probably spent the first 3 days after that posting just responding to people in messages on LinkedIn. And I had kind of a framework for how I would deal with this, which is that, and I'll kind of sort of lay out the rules of the game, which was that if somebody sent me a message, so first off, if somebody responded with a message, either in a direct message or a reply to the post, I responded. And if it was a candidate replying to the post, I would then take my responses to the DMs. So if they just sort of like responded to the post itself, I would respond to them in a direct message. If someone was kind of giving support, I would try to respond with like thank you or at least some kind of a reply. And then in the direct messages, that's sort of where like I would start engaging with all of these people, of which there were hundreds. So it took me days just to get through, sending people messages and replying. And the vast majority of that traffic happened in those first few days. The long tail was maybe like 2 or 3 weeks of people still responding and saying like, "Hey, I'm interested." And it's pretty rare now because it's been like a few months or 2 months, I think, since this. But occasionally, I'll still get somebody reaching out and pinging me on this. But in the DMs, the first thing I would do is I would go look at their background and I would see whether or not I thought there was a fit. And if I didn't think there was a fit, I would tell them up front. I would say, hey, I don't think based on your background, I think there's a good fit here. But in almost every case, I still offered them a chance to talk to me if they wanted to explore other things or just kind of get general career advice. So I put together a 30-minute link, Calendly link, and I gave it out to like almost everyone. And that's maybe like the first part of this, which was a really, really huge part of the exercise.
So tell me about this. So did you spend 3 weeks or more just talking to people who wanted to get hired?
It was about 3 weeks. Um, at some point, I started keeping my own tracker. So I had a spreadsheet that I started to just keep track of everybody that I was talking with, and specifically those that I was setting up time with. So there were hundreds of people that I spoke to in direct messages. There were about 55 that I ended up setting up half-hour sessions with. And over the course of about 3 weeks, had all of those sessions then talking with people. The vast majority of them were people that actually I felt like there was potentially some fit for these roles. Um, there were certainly like I could probably go look at the numbers, but I think gut reaction maybe like 5 to 10 were people that were just like, I get that there's no fit here, but let's talk. And that was kind of an interesting thing to do too. So
Yeah, and like, you learn from connections with people. Also, if it's a big company, sometimes you can refer people to other departments. Although, again, like the current market discourages people from doing any of this, right? Because everyone's overwhelmed with the amount of candidates they get without sort of searching. But it's interesting because this means that like you get actual real humans to engage with you. And in your human platform as opposed to 5 times removed. The resume is generated by ChatGPT, it's evaluated by ChatGPT, like then it gets to a recruiter, then it's like all of these things that sort of, like you said, remove the humanity out of the process.
and this is actually one of the core questions that I've been trying to answer through this as I sort of retrospect this process, which was it more humane? Like, was it actually more humane? That was obviously one of the goals, maybe even the overarching goal, other than obviously like I wanted to find good people and find them quickly. But I only had 5 yeses to give, right? I spoke with hundreds of people and then spoke more directly in this kind of a format with dozens. And only having that many yeses to give out means I'm going to tell a lot of people no. And I'm going to tell a lot of people no after they've kind of gotten into that place. Like they're still going through the roller coaster. They're still going like, oh, great, somebody's going to talk to me. We're going to actually like, I'm going to get to a real human. Right. Which like for a lot of people, that's an indication of like things are going well. So I didn't really I wasn't able to take people off the roller coaster. I tried to set good expectations of like, this is an informational session. We only have 30 minutes together. This is kind of a tough, I'm not going to get a great read of you and you're not going to get a great read of me in this time, but it's sort of a sanity check on whether or not you should apply. And there were a lot of people
And
that
I
we went through
will,
it and I still had to tell them no at the end.
right. And I will sort of say this, like, I've encountered this in America where people were being nice and not telling people that, like, not telling the interviewee that it isn't going well, and not look, kind of not even indicating in mannerism or whatever. And I always felt like this isn't actually helpful to either of the sides. You're just basically evading conflict and trying to like outsource it back to the recruiter or even like just ghost people, which some companies do. But like I feel like this is a lot more useful if you actually tell people like, hey, I'm not saying that this is going to be a fit. Um, Maybe there's not like half an hour. You can always give people half an hour, but like, if you're, let's not stall the process. Let's not keep going just because everybody's trying to be polite. But it does take some sort of like ability to be candid about this and some ability to confront conflict. And also, as I was saying, like I've lived in 3 different countries. Like people are different across cultures in how they're willing to communicate such things.
Yeah, and I think, and this sort of gets to my leadership values, which is that I believe that conflict management is like 90% of the job of leaders, right? It's figuring out how to enter conflict and how to resolve it. And I get it. I understand why people both get ghosted and ghost in this interaction. But one of the things that I believe good leaders do is they don't shy away from conflict. You have to be willing to engage with it. And like it sucks being the person that tells someone like, I don't think you're a good fit here. I don't think this is going to work out for you. I don't think it's worth your time applying. And like you're watching heartbreak in real time, right? It's not fun. And some people handle it better than others. But like it's that difference between like, all right, this is orders of magnitude worse, like similar only in nature, not in terms of severity, but it's like having seeing the body of a loved one versus just having them missing forever, right? Like knowing the person is dead sucks. But having that
How
just
did
sort of
we get
like,
to this analogy?
yeah, okay.
Is it harsh?
I said like in degree it's very different, but it's the
Right.
difference is like no closure, right? Like if you're just left wondering forever, like man, what happened with that? Like you kind of reach your own conclusion. Like I didn't see the body, but like they're not. I'm probably never going to see them again, right? Like they haven't called me. Nobody told me I didn't get the job, but I'm probably figuring that out on my own. But that lack of closure, along with like the added sort of feeling of almost being like disrespected, like they didn't give you enough respect to even tell you to your face that you weren't getting the job. Like it's tough.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is, so this actually works and doesn't work, right? Depending on the situation. But like giving a sort of as specific a feedback as you can, and in some cases very easy. It's like, your skill set is just not aligned with what I'm looking for or whatever. Um, in some cases it's difficult, and the most difficult situation is when people don't want to hear the feedback. So like there's a lot of that too, where you actually given a specific feedback on like, hey, here's what's not working, and the person's just like, oh, they told me they didn't have a open spot or something. I don't know, like you just need to explain it away so it's not about you. But yeah, I think I try to kind of be as specific as I can. um and sometimes it's not, it's just like you're interviewing 3 people and you have one role, and one person you just kind of feel better about. Like I don't even know. Like sometimes it is like I just feel like this is a better fit than somebody else, and it's hard to explain. But like our gut feelings are coming from our experience too.
And I think I did have the out in this to I was always upfront with somebody if I didn't feel like they would be a competitive candidate, and that was like this is kind of like what the spiel looked like after 55 sessions of this. It was like, hey, we have half an hour together. That's not enough time for me to really get a great handle on you, or you get a great handle on me, but we're going to try. And if I'm to put myself in the shoes of the candidate or the prospective candidate that I'm talking to, I want to come out of this with 2 things. Really, it's one thing, which is like, is this worth my time to apply? But that comes down to 2 areas. One, am I aligned potentially with this company? Like, is this an opportunity that I potentially want to explore? And number 2, am I a competitive candidate for that position? And so, like, what I would try to do is in those 30 minutes, try to answer those 2 things. And I would do that by talking about what the position is, what the company is, and then I would talk through what an actual interview loop would look like, and what we would be looking at them for. And then most of the time, like they would come away from that with a pretty good understanding themselves of like, are those places where I'm weak or strong? Do I think I would do pretty well? And then at the end of it, I'd be like, here's my read on you based on the conversation. And sometimes it was, I think you could probably do this job pretty well, but in the competitive landscape of this hiring market, I have a bunch of people already in my
Yeah.
pipeline that are way more experienced, and it's probably not worth your time, not because you couldn't do the job, but because you're just frankly kind of like outclassed in the current marketplace.
So I think this is the toughest thing, right? This is the toughest thing right now because like 3 years ago, I still had a bunch of friends who, like, mid-career decided to go into IT and did a boot camp and got hired with like $100,000 starting salary, right? Which wasn't my starting salary out of college, by the way, right? So, like, it's that kind of thing, which, like, just a couple years ago, we still had, like, we're willing to give a lot of chances to people who could upskill on the job given that they had the correct sort of, attitude and aptitude. And now, like, we're talking about people with all the computer science degrees and 20 years of experience being out of a job for 2 years. And like, I have run out of places to refer. Like, it's very difficult. So yeah, the toughest thing is like there's nothing wrong with the candidate at all. It's just that you were overwhelmed with overqualified people for the job.
It's brutal, and like the truth is, the current market is so wacky that I think this is probably true for like, I don't know, I'm gonna make up a percentage, but I won't even bother with that. A huge percentage, an overwhelming percentage of people that currently have jobs would probably not even get looked at if they were to apply for their own job right now, because there are so many people that are overqualified. I'm hiring for a senior engineering manager in the data platform space, and I have people applying that are former VPs, SVPs, C levels, and like, and I'm telling most of them no too. This is it's a really really strange market, and I have a lot of empathy for people in it right now, because if I were in it, I would be terrified, like, of finding something that even would be a fit for me.
So something that I was thinking about the other day is what happens in such recessions is that people who accidentally remained employed get much farther ahead than people who accidentally got laid off. Because, like, layoffs in most cases aren't about your skill set or like how well you're doing on the job. Now, there is some correlation, but in most cases, layoffs are random, right? And should be ignoring your skill set or demographics or whatever. And so you basically have people who got chopped at the wrong time in their career and in the recession timeline, right? And then they can't find a job, and so the people who are still employed are getting ahead both in terms of like their ability just get a paycheck and save their money and whatever, and also like they're still getting promoted, they're still getting like connections inside the organization, all of that stuff. So 5 years from now, this accidental divide is potentially a really major thing.
And I think that's a really hard thing for people to like. So macroeconomic trends and the kinds of things that are you might consider them just like bad weather. Like, there's not a lot you can do about it except just like work with it as best you can. Like, the role of luck in success is huge, right? And successful people rarely actually like will acknowledge that. Like, sometimes they do, right? And sometimes very famous people, they'll be like, how did you get there? And they're like, I was really lucky. And there's a ton of truth to that. The unfortunate thing is, like, if you find yourself either very lucky or very unlucky, there wasn't a whole lot you could have done about it. Yeah, this idea of manufacturing your own luck, what's within your like ability or sphere of control, influence to like work with, certainly do that. But there's still a huge amount of luck in everything we do. And as somebody that is struggling and on the unlucky side of things, that can feel really overwhelming, and like you just kind of got brutalized by fate or chance or whatever, and there's nothing you can really do about it. And I think if there's one thing to sort of just like keep you sane in that moment or help your sanity at all, it's just kind of like you kind of have to come back to do what you can, like whatever is in your influence and sphere. And you have to acknowledge and just kind of accept that, yeah, there is a bunch that's still outside of that. But you can either like kind of like lay down and let fate guide everything, or try to be an active participant in your own life. And I don't think that's a choice. Like, you just have to do what you can.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't even, I want to stay away probably from advising people what to do. Like just like you said, if I were looking for unemployment right now, I'd be terrified. So and that's not because of the lack of skills or connections or anything. It's just because of how overflooded the market is.
Yeah. So I guess going back then to the experiment. So this was so I had a bunch of meetings with people, right? So for about 3 weeks, it was like nonstop, just like my calendar was blasted, and I was just going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting, back to back to back, trying to keep my tracker updated. And ultimately, what would happen is if I had a meeting with somebody and I thought they were a yes, like if I was like, I think this makes sense for you to apply because your skill set, like you're probably a reasonably competitive for this, and I think there's a decent fit here, then I would just say, this is easy. Hand me your resume. I will give that to my recruiter. You don't have to go in and like fill out all the 8,000 boxes again. I'm gonna make that really easy for you too. And then for people who I felt were a no, I would still tell them like, okay, I don't think you're very competitive, but I won't most of the time. There were some people that I would just be like, you really should not apply. But if I thought they were like kind of on the fence, maybe not great, probably wouldn't do well, I would tell them. Then I'd tell them, but if you want, I'll still hand your resume to my recruiter. I mean, the recruiter's going to take it from there. They'll do the screen, they'll do all the other things. Like they probably won't make it through, and I would tell them that, right? But I wasn't going to stand in their way or be that obstacle after that point.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And like, it, so one thing again I was thinking about is the problem is that normally, as a candidate, you're looking for a good job, right? Like you're looking for a job that fits your skills and your needs and, culture and whatever. That's a normal environment. But right now, I think a lot of people are like, I just need a freaking paycheck, right? Because I need to feed my family. And that creates a situation where, like, even if you know you're not a great fit, you're still going to pursue any job opportunity that's afforded to you because you just don't have as many choices.
Yeah. And that's something that um, this is one of the more unfortunate steps to the dance. And I say that it's a dance. Like the hiring interaction is a dance. For a for some context, so like I've been fired from a job, right? And it hurts. It hurts, and you when you go into your next interviews, if you're still kind of raw from that experience, you want to be like, and especially if you're somebody that's like, I'm fairly idealistic, right? I have strongly held values and I want to work with people and organizations that hold those values. One of those is honesty and transparency. And so, like, when I started interviewing again, I really just wanted to be able to tell people, like, yeah, I got fired. It was bullshit. It was a political hit job, whatever. I've moved on. Let's not talk about that. Let me talk about what I can add to your company and like what I can bring to you. The truth is, nobody wants to hear that. There is a step, like there are steps to this dance, and it goes like this. The recruiter says, why are you looking for a new position? And you have to give some sort of positive spin. It has to be, I was there for a long time. The culture changed. I was ready to move on. I wanted new challenges. And all of those things can be true. Um, but it's sort of like, the red flag isn't that I got fired. The red flag is that I just wasn't following the steps to the dance. And
Right.
that's what they want people to
That's
do.
very interesting. So like the candor is good, but not always, and not like they're like if you are at dinner and you get served chicken and it's awful, you're not supposed to say thank you, that was an awful chicken. Like you're supposed to say, oh, this is great. Thank you very much for cooking this. Right? So like there are certain things you're not supposed to do in the name of candor. And again, this like obviously changes based on situation. And I think there are some people who would have hired you for your honesty, but there aren't many of them.
Yeah. And that was my experience, right? That I had that interaction enough to where like I could tell that even as I was going through this, and like these are all based on my values, and I'm going like, I want to work with a company that when we have this discussion, they get it, they understand, and they reflect that value even in their hiring process. But the hiring process is often even times carried out by contractors, or like it's not, the hiring process actually isn't a fantastic barometer of the values of the organization. And coming back to sort of like the steps of the dance, one of the dance steps here, now that I am was taking and have been taking a more active role in the hiring for these positions, is that like one of the steps to the dance that we expect from people is that, hey, you've got to be super excited, like this has got to be your dream job, right? Like every place you apply to, you've just got to be like the most excited to work in and work for. To your point, you how did you phrase this? Desperation. The point was desperation, right? Some people are just looking for a job. They really are just desperate for anything. They need a paycheck. They're going to default on their mortgage. They're going to get their car repossessed. Like that's real. And one of the things that bothers me about the steps to the dance is that like one of the steps to the dance is that you're not allowed to have desperation, and you have to come to this with all of the enthusiasm of someone that like doesn't really need a job, but like this is the place where I see myself in the future. And that's bullshit for most people. And so
That's so interesting. This is not something. So one of the you talked about like being fired from a job, but I think this is really like what's really disheartening about this is the interviewing, right? Because I've been lucky enough that I haven't been to many interviews in my life. Like I most interviews I've gone to, I've passed the process, right? I freaking still remember in a couple of interviews that were like, I don't know, 20 or 10 years ago that I got like a no. And like, what do you mean no? What, look at me, I'm great. Like what? And it's like, an interview out of, four companies I looked at, one said, nah, you're not a good candidate. And like, it still hurts 20 years later. Right? So like, I cannot imagine how it feels if you've gone like if you got laid off and then you've gone to like 20, 30, 100, like I don't even know where to start because like the being laid off in itself, like many people I know, like their entire team has been laid off. Like that's clearly not their fault. That like they clearly had nothing to do with it. And the company's just changing direction or something. But then they go into the market and they start interviewing for the current level and they start interviewing for the lower level and whatever. And it's just like the process is just super disheartening and creating desperation.
fundamentally, it breaks you as a person. And that's, I am somebody who is well accustomed to rejection. Sasha and I we've spoken a bit before about our past, and one of the things in my past is that I've had some time in sales, even before coming to software. I'm one of those people that has like a really strange background and kind of like snuck their way into software through a side door. But I have a fair amount of sales experience. I also grew up religious and went on a mission as a missionary trying to teach me, and tons of rejection, right? Like I am somebody who, like, no joke, people have told me no and told me to like get lost and called me names and stuff. Like I sold cars for a while. Like I am very used to rejection. But even this, like even for me, somebody who's been through that over and over and over again, after I was fired and was looking for some period of time, those no's, the repeated stacking up of no's, and even sometimes the way that you're, like we talked about getting ghosted and how that feels, even sometimes like extra insult on top of injury, it'll break you down. Like it takes the best of us, and it can break you, and that is a really really tough spot to be in when everything, like back to that desperation, like a lot of people don't have any sort of safety net or any way to just like be unemployed for an extended period of time and be okay with that.
Um, this is rough, and like I, how in financial podcasts they tell you like this is not financial advice, so this is not therapy. I'm not, but I'm just thinking about this. Um, so like first of all, rejection hurts as a human biologically. We're like when we get rejected, especially repeatedly, we do grow thicker skin, but also like this is plugging in into our like I'm gonna die, like because we cannot survive without society, we cannot survive without a group, right? And so like they just hijacks our lizard brain and all sorts of things. Um, but I think so. I'm giving a talk in a couple of weeks about learning, which is like every time I give the talk, there's more books I'm referencing. It's like it's out of hand, like how many things I have read that, and you start seeing themes in the in the research on how people learn and why people learn or don't learn and stuff like that. And so like I think one of the punchlines to the talk is like fear is your enemy, whether that fear is real or perceptual, right? Like it doesn't have to be real. In many cases, it's not. It's just your self evaluation and self judgment that causes you to fear, but like it's as real to you that you are, at least to an extent, in control of it, and you can train yourself out of that fear. That like not the if someone's shooting at me, that's very real, right? Or if I have a very toxic boss that is trying to fire me, like that's very real. This is not me imagining things or whatever. But if this is a game between me and myself, then I have some level of control over my perception of how difficult things are. Um, it's not easy, but it is a thing that you can sort of be better at. And so I think taking steps to understand and embrace the fact that your worth as a person is not tied to your productivity
Yeah.
is probably like if I were in this situation right now, what I would do is read all the like I don't know Buddhist text or whatever. Like there's a lot of literature out there saying like your self-worth is not connected to how much money you make or to how productive you are or whatever. I would definitely 100% be very invested in that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. Not advice, right? And it sort of take self care is first is sort of like a theme there, which is if you're going to go through something difficult, like if you know something difficult is happening or you're going to go through something, like take care of yourself first. Make sure you're eating well, you're working out, you're sleeping well. And all of that's really tough when you're super stressed. Like sleeping well for a lot of people is really difficult when you're super stressed, and eating well and thinking like any of this stuff makes sense. But meditating, taking time for yourself when you're literally like you feel like you're facing existential risk is sort of like great advice, but really difficult to follow in the moment. But that fear, the other things, that sort of to your point around conditioning for fear, you can do that, but it takes practice. Like it was really scary to walk up to people in Russia speaking Russian and say like, hey, do you want this religious text? Can I teach you more about like my faith? And like the first few times you do it, the first 10, 20, 30, 50, 800 times you do it, it's scary, but it gets less scary. And I think there's a lot of situational training. I've never been in the armed forces, but live fire exercises and things like that tend to be ways to face your fear in a repetitive manner that's relatively safe. The problem with this and in this space is that like how many times have you found yourself unemployed? How many times have you been fired? For a lot of people, this might be the first time. So it's really hard to sort of like condition that in the moment.
Right. I mean, I guess the interviews, like also getting to the interviews, that's the other part of it, right? But like, yeah, like so again, from the psychology perspective, exposure therapy, right? But again, it's hard to talk. Like the part of the exposure therapy is you're safe and you're getting trained while being exposed to a certain thing, but you're safe while being exposed to it. If your mortgage is about to default, like if you're about to default on your mortgage, you're not safe,
Yeah.
right? So like divorcing, you can train yourself out of the fear that is perceptional. It's hard to train yourself out of reality, right? Um, I this is all very complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so maybe going back to something and not switching topics, but something that you might find very interesting too was the reaction to recruiters, or the interaction with recruiters, because I think anybody that spends a lot of time on LinkedIn knows that you're going to get a ton of attention from people trying to sell you things, and recruiters among them. And if you are a manager, a hiring manager who lists an open position, get ready for a flood of recruiters to reach out to you. And uh, it's really easy for us to get mad at recruiters, like, or salespeople in general, like, stop wasting my time. I don't want to talk to you. But that was another thing that I tried to be deliberate about in this, was I actually did respond almost always. There were I know there were some cases where, like, I didn't see him, I didn't get to him in time, or I didn't, like, I might have overlooked some people, but, like, almost every recruiter that hit me up, and again, those were dozens, if not hundreds, I did respond to them and at least say, the message, which was true, which is like, hey, I'm not allowed to work with external recruiters. Happy to make the connection, but or there's nothing here for you, right? But I at least tried to treat them like humans still, because they are.
You're a good person.
Don't
And
even I won't go
tell
that
me
far.
about your internal recruiters. So you're essentially sort of going around them, and you are finding your own candidates instead of relying on them to find your candidates, and then like going in the opposite direction. How did that go?
Um, yeah, I'm glad you asked the question, because it is one of the other interesting learnings, which is that in a way my talent team wasn't ready for this. I ended up putting 20 some odd people into our pipeline as a result of this, and it was tough for my internal recruiting team to keep up and get everything scheduled. So uh, sort of another interesting learning, which is, I mean, they were along for the ride. They were overjoyed that I was adding people to the pipeline. But I think if I were to try and do something like this again, or to anybody who might be considering something akin to this, my advice now would be, like, talk to your recruiting team ahead of time, make sure that they understand what this would potentially look like and how much work this is going to add, because there's a timeliness to candidates too, right? Even in this market, you need to be able to move pretty quickly with people. And unfortunately, and I'm willing to say this publicly, because I've apologized to a lot of the people who I did speak to as a result of this. Like, we didn't do a great job of following up with everybody and communicating with everybody. And there are some, like, constraints and complications that happen once you do start doing a formal interview process. The communications start to have, like, legal implications and stuff, and so you need, like, I basically, once I handed candidates over to my tech team, like my tech recruiting team, I kind of needed to get out of the way, so that I didn't potentially, they're the professionals that understand all the legal implications of all of our interactions. And so at that point where it was official, I needed to kind of let them take over. And I don't think we treated everybody with the respect that I would have liked after that point. And I've apologized as well as I can to as many of those people as I've been able to find. And some of them probably, I don't know that, they didn't reach out to me afterwards if something wasn't good. But yeah, that's certainly one thing, is just, like, try to bring your talent team along as quickly and as well as you can ahead of time.
Yeah, and I also, so like in your case, they were happy for you to do this. I also can envision a situation where they wouldn't be happy for you to do this, and they would be concerned about, the process not being followed exactly to the T or something like that. I'm sure also, like, you kind of put yourself at the beginning of the pipeline, which is like, in some cases you would be at the end of the pipeline. So did that make any difference compared to, like, if you were going in the opposite direction?
The theory and the hope was that it would introduce more humanity earlier in the pipeline, right? Like, that was going to be the difference. Um, Taking out that aspect of it and just sort of looking at the efficacy of that recruiting process, like, was it more effective to have me involved at the beginning of the pipeline rather than sort of the end of that funnel? Um, yes and no. Yes, in the sense that my read on who should be uh, quickly weeded out versus who should be explored is going to be more accurate than any recruiter that's representing me, right? Like as the hiring manager, I have a much better view. Like I'm always going to be better calibrated, even looking at resumes for like who's better to get into the funnel and who shouldn't be. So from that perspective, I think that was very effective. The other side of it, though, is that there's a reality, and I think we kind of mentioned this earlier with the scale of the exercise, which is that if it had even been two, three, four times as many people as had responded, I don't think I could have done this. I wouldn't have had enough time.
Right.
And so because I also had to put a lot of things on hold. Like as I said in the sort of like initial post there, like I already have a full-time job that's not being a recruiter. I am managing the cloud platform operations, the teams and people that are both like building continuing functionality and keeping the lights on for the entire operation here. And that itself is a lot of work. I'm lucky enough to have really great people to work with that I was able to delegate a bunch of that and say like, hey, for the next 2-3 weeks, I am just like laser focused on hiring. I need you guys to hold things together and kind of like, don't let it all burn down. Like it's almost like being absent from my job for a little while. And I could do that for a short period of time, right? 2-3 weeks is something that it's like, you can handle that. But if I were to do that for 4, like 4, 5, 6 weeks, a month and a half, that would be really difficult. And the company would feel, and my teams would feel my absence in a
Right.
much more, um,
And this is interesting, from perspective of, so like if you're making this commitment, even to yourself, that you're going to respond to every single person who contacts you, and let's say this blows up beyond your control, and there's like 1,000 people wanting your attention or something like that, and it kind of becomes complicated. Um, but yeah, I mean, theoretically, so like hiring people is obviously, I feel like even today, like even in the current market, we kind of don't pay enough attention to it. It's probably because we don't actually know how to hire the best person, like actually, because like it sometimes, I think about this a lot. Like, if you work for a big company, getting promoted is insane. Like, it's like it could take you 2 years of gathering documentation and proving and da 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 da, and going to like 100 people, all sorts of things. And then we sometimes hire people after 3 hours of interviews into the same level that someone else is trying to get promoted to. And I'm like, how is this like, how are we discounting everything we know about the person and making them do all of this extra work? And then in a lot of cases, like the interview process is like very, very relaxed compared to the internal promotions.
I think there's a really interesting point there around sort of the psychology of organizations and individuals within them, which is that like when somebody's brand new, like when we're hiring somebody, there's no baggage. Like they are pure potential, right? Like we view them through the lens of all of the things they can help us do and all the problems they'll help us get rid of, and we have no idea, if there's somebody that's going to like uh, be problematic and like sexually harass somebody at a company function, or if they're right, like we don't know what baggage they're bringing. All we know is like they can solve problems for us. But if you've been at the company for a while, you are like they see you warts and all, and it's really easy for us to take for granted all the things and benefits that we get from people that are already in the organization, and actually kind of like only view the existing people in the organization through how much of a pain in the ass they are. Uh, and I
I,
wish.
I don't I don't even I don't even think this like this even would be better if it was the case. I think the case is just that, like, we sort of, so the weird psychology, this is from the weirdest people in the world, like the weird psychology is to overvalue what you already possess. So in this case, we for some reason do the opposite. We undervalue what we already possess. And like, I've seen really good people be like, I'm gonna go work for somebody else if you don't give me, I don't know, $20,000 extra. And the company is like, don't care. And then it takes them like 6 months to hire and replace this person. Potentially, they replace this person with two people, and then they have to upskill those people. And then, like, nobody knows what's happening. All of this, like, crazy loss of productivity because they were like, no, this was someone's like a little bit out of the salary band, whatever. Like, this is insane to me. Um, I do not think that this is because, like, we know what the faults of the person are. Well, a lot of times it has nothing to do with it. This has something, like, this is purely bureaucratic. So either, like, we're talking salary bands being a problem, or we're talking like you have to have a portfolio and, documented impact and a recommendation from three people in director level, whatever, like, whatever, right? So, like, lots of bureaucracy.
I can give you my opinion on this, which is, I mean, take this as just my opinion. It's not really founded on other than anything other than like my own observations and experiences. But I have a very dim view of corporations and corporate identity, uh, and I believe that at least part of that interaction is that if corporations are people, and beyond sort of the legal definitions there, which are contentious, but if organizations of people are sort of like an amalgamation, like if you could assign a single sort of like personality to an organization, which is itself this sort of like aggregate entity, most of those people, like if you were to personify them, right, put all these people in a room together, like it's a bunch of shitty people. And one of the ways in which they're kind of shitty is like they're pretty arrogant, and they don't want you as part of the organization to, like, they owe you nothing, and they don't want you to ever assert yourself or your power or your authority. I actually think that like a lot of what we're going through right now is a pushback to the great resignation. Like, this is, we made companies feel vulnerable for an instant, and they have come back to reassert themselves and let us know that we are the weak party in this. And when you go to your company and you're like, I deserve better, you should give me a raise, or you're going to have to fire two, or you're going to have to hire two more people. That again, that aggregate entity is just like, how dare you? Like, we can replace you in an instant. We don't want anybody acting like that. And
But
so they're willing
your
to
company is like your family. We're like family.
we're the most dysfunctional of families. And in fact,
Right.
it's the companies that say that like the companies that want you to just chug the Kool-Aid the worst, those are the, like, run from those companies.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's probably different market dynamics that I perceive about, like, the current situation that's happening. But it is maybe something with asserting control. I think the return to office is very much asserting control. So, like, we have first of all, we've proven that we can all work remotely, and that's fine. We've also proven that people are more productive, and majority of them are happier working remotely. And yet, every company I know is determined to make people go back to the office, and there's literally no explanation for it except for, I want to be like, Taylorism. I want to exert control. I want to see the people. They must be working, right? And, like, people tell you stories about, like, oh, someone outsourcing their job or working two jobs. Like, that's, first of all, this almost doesn't happen. But even if it did, like, apart from security violations and whatever, which you should just be better at, controlling access and whatever. Um, like, if I can work two jobs and accomplish all the results and meet your expectations, you should be paying me for two jobs. Like, literally, there's no, the my productivity should be evaluated in the context of the results I accomplished, not in the context of how many hours I showed up to the job.
100%. No, I completely agree with you. The RTO stuff is all about power. It's all about leverage and control. And as much as, like, logically that makes sense, that somebody should be able to work two jobs, and as long as they can get both jobs done, like, what's the problem? I think the problem again comes back to, like, it's control. Like, your hours, we don't share you.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's some privacy and security and whatever implications. Like, this, I'm not saying people should work two jobs. I'm just saying, like, the argument in itself of, like, why? Because you should own me? Like, not really. But, you know, um, this is a very sidetracked rant about big corporations. I actually, like, I have to say, you just said you have a negative opinion of big corporations. I actually
I work
love.
for one. I know what that looks like.
Well,
And
like, I love big corporations. They have a lot going for them. Um, there's there's a lot good if it's a big corporation with good sort of overall culture, and if you have a good manager, which is very important, um, then like your life can be excellent in a big corporation. In some ways, much easier than in a small company. Um, but yeah, there's some downsides to the, and this is why I work for myself.
Yeah, and I, I should say, like, for some clarification here, that like the company that I work for is not perfect. It's also not evil. It's not bad. It's not right. Like there is an overwhelming corporate culture in America. Like American corporations have a very like we operate a certain way. It's how we operate, and if you're going to participate in it, for the most part, like these are the kinds of companies you're going to be joining. There aren't a lot out there that like you know you when people are like I work for the greatest company ever, like usually there's like there's Kool-Aid on their lips.
I don't know. Like again, I've worked for at least one company. I don't know, should I name it? Like I don't know. I loved working at Microsoft, right? And like it's a huge freaking company, and you know, I worked with good people. I had challenges, I had excitement. Like it was really good, and I had multiple jobs inside Microsoft, right? So that was part of it. Like you could go find another job inside the company, and I was encouraged, and it was, you know, kind of making sure that you are challenged and excited. But like I I think that speaking of hiring, coming back to our companies, there's usually like a process. There's usually a bunch of check boxes that you got to fill. These are sometimes based on good research, sometimes not so much. Sometimes very bureaucratic, sometimes a little bit better. Um, like what happened with that? So like obviously you're having a conversation with um, a candidate, and maybe you had a good impression, so you're putting them into the pipeline. What happens with the require, like, I don't know, some companies have like, again, at least 3 people must interview or whatever, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean we have our own process too, right? Like we have uh, usually 2 rounds of interviews. We have a functional and then a loop round where we have them talk to a number of other people, and we have a pretty standard process for how we interview and evaluate those candidates. I think kind of going back to something that you said a moment ago, which is, or at least kind of hinted at, I think another important thing here, to sort of like, if I can kind of close a loop on some of that conversation around culture within the company and American corporate culture too, like another part of these being aggregate entities, sort of like aggregate personalities, is that like any corporation, any organization that's large enough is not homogenous in its culture, right? Like there are pockets of
Yeah.
function and dysfunction all over the place.
Yeah, so I do have some friends that hated working for Microsoft. Speaking of that, like so, right, so like in it, just your personal experience, the manager you have, the direct team that you have, all of that stuff, or just maybe your culture fit personally to the organization. But yeah, you can have good and bad experience in almost the same place.
Yeah. And like I've spoken with lots of people who've worked at Amazon, and I remember speaking with a guy who was there for like 10 years. And I was just like, how, dude? How? That place is notorious for being a meat grinder for devs, right? And he was just like, I found a great manager and I followed him forever. Like
Yeah.
everywhere they went, I went, and it was great. And
I think my brother is about to hit 5 years at Amazon, and he's pretty happy, I think. So,
yeah,
exceptions happen. So more questions. So first of all, um, would you do this again? Would you invert the process again?
probably not in exactly the same way. I've had so I appreciate the question, and it's one that I've tried to answer for myself. And uh, I don't like the number of people that now I am connected to on LinkedIn, like practically doubled because of this. Like, not that I like this isn't me going like I know so many people, I'm super well connected. Just like the numbers, like I said, there's a scale at which this doesn't work anymore. And I'm no longer positive that this scale, because I also, like, I talk a lot at conferences, I do a fair amount of networking. I'm not famous by any degree, but I may now be at a point where if I were to try and attempt this again, I may not be able to handle it myself. And so that's kind of difficult. So the question in my mind is, how do I try to achieve as much of what was good from this process as I can, while, I mean, it's an iterative exercise, right? What was good, what worked, what didn't work? How do we try and get what
Okay, so
worked?
what was great about and also like so this is interesting because like you chose one network when you're saying which is a professional network and whatever, but again, this is a subset of people you know and a subset of people that saw that post as opposed to like obviously, I haven't seen that post, like stuff like that, right? So you're getting like what was selected by the network and then selected by the algorithm and then the people who actually bought the message and chose to connect with you. So what was good in the exercise?
I mean, what was good is the reach. I guess, like, uh, for me, this was a post that had like almost 40,000 impressions, which is small potatoes, like for most people. Um, and
What's good is Matt got famous.
I did not, nor do I really want to, but the from if we were to be very cynical about this, like if I were to just like, if I were to treat it as simply a marketing message, right? Like, I'm going to craft a message that resonates with people about the humanity and how I'm going to treat you well, and then bring a whole bunch of eyeballs and then just throw you at my recruiters. Like, it would have worked for that, right? It would have probably tarnished my own personal brand. Like, it is like, I can't just say I'm going to do a thing and then not do it, and not have repercussions there. So, like, that's one of the things that I struggle with is, if I am not actually the one that's going to talk to you, then there's not really, like, I can't, it's not, from the beginning, I'm
Does it
lying,
work?
right?
Could you talk to someone for 5 minutes instead of 30?
I mean, 30 was already a stretch, if I'm honest. 30 was a stretch just to tell people, like, what are we doing? What does this team look like? And what are your skills look like? To have a human interaction takes more than just a few minutes.
Right. Well, so like there's research that says we form an impression in first 20 seconds, whatever. Like, you know what I mean? It's like there's stuff that would lead me to believe that 5 minutes could be interesting. But it also like, yes, if you're having a substantial conversation about what the job is and what the candidate is, then yeah, 30 minutes is probably the least you could do.
Because again, kind of coming back to the whole, like, if I'm trying to be empathetic and put myself in the shoes of the person, like, uh, if I one of the, like, biggest problems that we have as candidates is that this process does not respect our time, right? We have to fill out the 8,000 pages, and, like, even if it's just 3 pages, but it's stuff that we've had to fill out 100 times before. Like, we're going to spend 15 minutes on an application for somebody to spend 15 seconds reviewing it. That's even if it gets past the filters. And then, and like, that's all it gets. So from a sort of like time perspective, like, we are shitting all over candidates in terms of our respect for their time. So what I was trying to do is sort of like the lure here, but also the promise was like, I'm going to respect your time. I'm going to actually give you some time. You get more than just a 15-second look. And that's why I think, like, again, for me as a candidate, what I want to get out of this is it actually worth my time to apply? Is it worth my time to go through that, potentially that brain damage of, like, I'm now going to go spend 15 minutes and put all my stuff into the form, and go through now waiting for a recruiter and potentially
Because
get,
everyone has slightly different forms, so you can't even automate this stuff.
exactly. So, like, that was, and I believe that that's part of why this resonated with people, was like, effectively what I was saying is like, hey, I know it sucks to be out there right now. I'm going to try and respect your time. And um, but scaling, like that's ultimately, like if we kind of come back to like scale is the problem that comes for us all. This is a scalability problem. Like I don't scale to where I can give, like if I had 1,000 people that were responding to that and we're like, yeah, and if all of them were like reasonably well qualified to where like it made sense for me to spend time with them, or they followed up on like, I do want to spend time with you even though you told me that I'm not super great, like uh and I also still had to like, I had to go look, I had to go look at their LinkedIn profile first and figure that out. So like this
Right.
took a fair amount of time. And at the numbers that we're operating at, especially in this market, that like scale is the problem with this
Like
exercise.
again, if we weren't in a tech recession, then like you would get 100 responses, and now you could get 1,000 responses and more. And what do you do with that? Yeah, it's interesting, and like I also agree on the like you basically taking the burden of spending time to yourself as opposed to like taking it away from the candidate because you have to do some evaluation and whatever. Like you could potentially do sort of, first come, first serve. I will respond to the first 100 or whatever people. That is a potential way to like kind of, you know, um, yeah, do a similar thing, but not die at scale. But yeah, it's it is what it is.
Yeah. So that's really why I've struggled with that question of like, would I do it again? And I think the question of would I do it again isn't so much would I, it's could I, like literally do the logistics of it work
It,
out?
it's very interesting also because like I'm thinking about like posting a similar thing like 3 years ago or whatever, and like potentially I'd get no responses because like no one was looking for a job and no one cared. It's just it's interesting to see how the dynamics change, like the outcomes.
Yeah.
Um, uh, what was negative? Was there any negatives?
Yeah. Honestly, just part of one of the negatives was just my sanity, the amount of time that this required, and the constant context switching. Like it was tough. Like that was a negative. I signed up for it. I sort of knew what I was getting into, but that was tough. And feeling like I was sort of like I said, I had people that I was able to delegate to take some of my other um, duties and
Responsibilities.
responsibilities for me, but that was tough. I'd say that
Could
was
you have outsourced the interviews? Could you have someone on your team do part of the screening and stuff like that?
that's probably something that would be a way to scale this. It doesn't scale infinitely, right? Like I don't have enough people on my team to
Right.
handle 13 or 14 or 20 times the traffic. That was a weird place to start in terms of multipliers. I don't know why I chose 13, but that's there's a certain multiplier that gets added if I add those people in. But again, there is something different about talking to the hiring manager, the person that's actually going to make the decision, versus somebody on their team.
I don't know. I think talking to someone on the team is like potentially as valuable or like very close because you sort of getting a different, but like I wouldn't want to go work somewhere where I only have spoken to a hiring manager. Ideally, I want to talk to someone who reports to them as well. So like I'm just getting in a different part of the process, but it's still a part of the process I would like to go through. But yeah, like so, it sounds to me like this was mostly positive experience for you, and it probably was a positive experience for the candidates, except for the scale. So like there is a scale at which is no longer sustainable. Um, I'm wondering if, well, so like all of the reason the hiring process doesn't respect candidates' time is because the company is protecting your time as a hiring manager or whatever hiring person. Um, but I'm wondering if we're sort of shooting ourselves in the foot by doing that because like we put in so many barriers in front of good people that they can't even get through the, I don't know, resume screen potentially.
I think that's absolutely true, and I don't. have a way of really like systemically like fixing that problem, which is that like, let's ask it a different way. Are there good candidates that we're throwing away in the resume review? People that if we were to like pass them all the way through and hire them, that they would like show up great, they do
100%.
fantastic work, and we'd be like, oh my God, we're so glad we hired you. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
There
and
are those people.
unfortunately, this is even like let's remove the AI read this or recruiter read this. I could read the resume and not know that whoever wrote it is a great person to work with. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of correlation between a great resume and a great person to work with. I think interviews are a little bit more representative, but resumes are like, in my opinion, really not.
I agree. And this is probably going to feel like a weird connection, especially given how much we've talked about like having empathy for people. But like part of the problem with hiring is that we suck at firing.
Yeah, yeah, yes.
and and it's that like, so I heard somebody say this the other day and it resonated with me, which is that like the two most difficult things to do in an organization are get someone promoted or get someone fired, right? Like in terms of like the amount of paperwork and effort that it takes from managers, like usually it takes you said this, it can take 2 years to build a portfolio to get someone promoted, and it can take just as long sometimes in a lot of organizations to have somebody exited.
So I will tell you about this in a different way. So America doesn't really have federal protection. So like you can fire anyone at any point without any explanation, really. And when I first moved here, this was wild to me because, like, what do you mean someone can show up? And I worked for a small company, so they really like there was no anything, and like there were a couple people that they showed up on Monday to work and were told like, we no longer have any use for your skills, which is insane. Like it's crazy. Um, and I was like, what the, like, how can you like work in this environment and whatever? And I spent a long time sort of always feeling for the little guy. And then I got acquainted with the firing process from the other side of it in a big corporation. And I was like, maybe the letting people go at will wasn't the worst that could happen because like you can have a year of stress on every side because you need to provide so many justifications to the fact that someone doesn't belong where they are, and like it consumes more of your time than like investing in people that do belong where they are, and it just is completely, yeah, counterintuitive.
Yeah, and I recognize too the irony of saying that like it's really difficult to fire people, given that many people who might be listening felt like they got fired for like a drop of a hat, like it didn't make sense. But there is this
But
space
that's
where
unfortunately the difference between layoffs and firings, right?
exactly,
Because you lay people off without a cause and you can do it anytime at any point. And like you really don't, and in the current environment, you don't even have to have any type of justification. People are making record profits and laying off hundreds.
yeah,
Like this, I don't
there
think
is
this
a
even existed before.
there's an
And
odd cutout in the law for like we have to lay off a bunch of people because it makes sense for the business. The distinction is like if we have to let one person go because that person is underperforming, that's where it gets incredibly
yeah,
iffy.
yeah. And then suddenly you have to justify. And again, this is in America, this is something that companies impose on themselves. Yet, like sometimes it can be ridiculous amounts of bureaucracy. And again, I my claim is it's not good for anybody. It is not good for the team. It is not good for the manager, and it ultimately isn't good for the person either.
Yeah. And this is kind of where I come back to like how this impacts hiring is that there are a whole I mean I've met people who are like, hey, can you try me out, like, like if we had a way to just like do tryouts, like we could actually get rid of like most of this hiring process, not most but a lot of it, like
I
so
mean,
much of
there
the
are
interview
contracts
process.
to hire, right? Like you do have a tool that you could use. I don't know why not many companies use that because like honestly, instead of doing 15 interviews and coding tests and whatever, like I think a contract to hire would give you a much better result.
There's a different psychology, at least in America, between sort of like a lot of people that are willing to be contractors versus those that like want a home. uh, that's an overgeneralization because like actually there are people on my team now who like were contractors at parts in their career. Um, but there is sort of this space where like often people become
There's no
contractors.
there's no public health insurance.
Yeah, and people become
Still a
contractors.
psychological issue.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Definitely there's a sociological issue tied to like healthcare and everything. Absolutely. I do think that basically the big problem with contract to hire is that which contracting firm do you work with, and what access to talent that they have, and like it does get complex there. If we were able to just basically do contract to hire with anybody, if we didn't have to work with a specific contracting agency, if it was
You
just like,
don't always. So like I mean you can obviously just directly hire people, but like for I actually don't know. Big corporations don't do that. I actually don't know why. Because I've seen small companies do that, but not big corporations.
well, and we're kind
Um,
of getting to the punchline here, which is that like we don't do that because all of the like a contract to hire, like which is sort of the legal definition or like how we would talk about this like within the industry. But if we were to just sort of like reduce it to layman's term, like the Eli 5, explain it like I'm 5, like if we could just say like, yeah, come to work, we'll try you out for a bit. If you don't work, you don't work, we're gone. If you do, then like great, then it works out. And the reason why we can't do that isn't because it's a system that is like doesn't make sense. Like a lot of employers and employees would totally sign up for that. Like just come on board, we'll try you out for a little while, pay you for the days that you're here. If we don't like it, you're gone. And we have some sort of agreement ahead of time. If you make it 6 months and we like you, we hire you. If you make it 6 months and we don't like you, you're gone. Like we could figure this out. The problem is it's the legal frameworks around it and the legal frameworks of employment in the United States specifically that make introduce so much friction to that sort of a process that make it not make sense for most employers.
yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like it's making me think if like maybe we'd be better off if what comes out of this recession is like that contract to hire becomes a little bit more prevalent because like honestly as an employee too sometimes I think like it's better to have the opportunity to do contract to hire because it just gives you the ability like if you ended up in a very bad place like you don't sort of get overcommitted to like this is my forever job and you can kind of hop places and not feel so bad about it so yeah I don't know but okay we are at time probably. So like, what do we want to sort of? What's the bottom line? What did we learn? And what do we want to leave the listeners with?
I guess I haven't really thought about this message ahead of time, so maybe this is just off the cuff.
I'll give you an out. You can recommend that people go read a book or something.
Um, no, I think so. Reading a book is good, and it's maybe part of my thing here, which is like if you're listening to this, there's a good chance you're very interested in hiring in the market because you're in the market right now, and maybe my message to you is like, um, you're not alone. This is a shit show, and I'm sorry you're going through it. And do what you can to take care of yourself. And maybe that is reading a book. Maybe it's going for a walk. Maybe it's like, this is a really stressful time. Do what you can to take care of yourself. Recognize that you do have value. Try not to take all the rejection personally, and just keep going.
Yeah, I so um I think this is a really good message. So I was just trying to think what book I would recommend and there I don't know. I was thinking of rereading Carnegie with the How to Stop Worrying and Start Living and like I know it's really old but I read it twice and I feel like it helped both times and like I'm like maybe I should read it again. Um there was a so I think I think what's helpful maybe in the current situation, if you're in the job market, is divorce the real danger from the danger you perceive, right? And I think the Carnegie book a little bit helps with that. But like, you can take steps to make the actual situation as good as it can be, right? Because like obviously you have to take care of yourself and your family financially, and so like figure it out like do whatever you can to take care of that and then maybe try to work on divorcing your self-worth from the avalanche of rejection and like investing in yourself in whichever way you can. you know, also you can go work for yourself. I'm a proponent of that.
Well, and from somebody who's had some experience in sales, I'll say too, like it's a numbers game. Like there is a numbers game component to this. So send out as many resumes as you can. There's going to be a hit there. You will end up with some hit ratio of resumes sent out to first interviews. And then that's the point at which do whatever you can to show up to those interviews as your best self. And keeping yourself in a good place psychologically is the best way to do that and maximize your chances. And maybe that means, like, if you have the ability to hang on for a little bit and you're not in immediate dire straits, time box the amount of time that you spend daily on uh, job hunting activities, and then ensure that you're also getting time during your day to do things that are like making, right? Like start building that game that you always wanted to build, or learn how to do AI prompt engineering, or something that'll give you some feeling of fulfillment and progress that'll help
And
keep
it
your
puts
mental
you in
health.
the zone and helps you be creative and happy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Life is hard. um, I feel like I had another parting words, but I guess I'm blanking on what I was thinking. So, um, like just try to take care of yourself because eventually, in most cases, life does work out. So, we've all lived through multiple crises, and usually there is somewhere a recovery. Um, so just take care of yourself and your family as much as possible to get there.
Yeah.
All right. Wow. Semi-optimistic? I don't know.
Well, I can't take credit for these words, but similar to what you've just said, um, anxiety is fear of the future. Depression, or maybe it's not depression. I'm forgetting it, but the other side of it is dwelling in the past. And to be successful, you need to stay in the moment. And the truth about the future is you've survived everything so far. Like you just said, you've survived everything so far. You've been through some shit, and you've survived it so far. So there's really good evidence that do what you do and you'll get through this too. It's not 100%. There's some survivorship bias in there,
Yeah.
but try and abandon your anxiety of the future. Be in the now, and like there's a
Yeah.
real good chance you'll get through it.
There was so a particular thing I'm thinking about from that Dale Carnegie book was like imagine the worst case scenario, right? What's the absolute possible worst case scenario that could happen? Like, and then figure out how to deal with that. And if you can deal with that, then work to improve your situation so that you don't get to the worst case scenario. And usually, when you try to envision the worst case scenario, um, you get to the point where you're like, okay, I could actually deal with it. There was another relevant point, and I know I said we were wrapping up, and there's another relevant point. Someone did research, and I don't remember the exact study they did, but there was like an industry or a company at danger of layoffs, and they interviewed a whole bunch of people who were at risk of layoffs it was over 6 months. It was maybe 12 months, like a really extended period of time. Now, people had really, really hard time dealing with being at the risk of layoffs. That was really psychologically difficult for them. And then they interviewed people who actually got laid off after they've been laid off. And within if like 3 months or whatever, most of them were employed again and most of them were happy. And so there was this huge disparity between like people worrying about layoffs for a year and not being able to take action because like this fear is all based on ambiguity and not knowing what's happening. And once they got into this worst case scenario that they were fearing, like they were actually able to deal with it and proceed with their life and get better. So basically, again, try to take care of your actual situation in the present and try to employ psychological tools as you can to not worry so much about the future.
Amen.
Okay. Amen. Okay, this time we're actually finishing. So thank you anyone who joined, and we'll see you next time.